Saying a special good morning to those of you listening to Classic Radio 105.5, 105.9 on the FM dial. Those of you viewing us via GBN TV, whether it's Channel 7, Channel 11, Channel 20. Good morning to you also. Welcome. It's Monday, the 9th day of December 2024. I'm your host, GT, and it's to the point. Our apology for the late start this morning. Our sincere apology for that. Let me say good morning to my guests. I'm the worst with names, so let me see. Okay, Jacqui McKenzie. I've got it. Thanks for helping me out with that. How are you this morning, Miss McKenzie? How are you?
Fine, thank you. I really am sorry about the time. I should say to listeners, the reason you're late is because of me. I wasn't sure this was still happening, but anyway, I'm here now.
They say it's better to be late than never.
Yes, of course.
Better late.
Yes.
Of course. Tell us something about yourself before we get this conversation started this morning. Who's Jacqui McKenzie?
Okay, well, I'm born of a Grenadian parent. My mother's Grenadian. My father was Jamaican. He's passed. And I lived here between the ages of 13 and 19.
Okay.
Having come from the UK and then going back to the UK. I now live in the UK with my family, which includes 3 adult children, and I'm a partner at a law firm called Lee Day, which is a major human rights specialist firm. There's about 1,000 of us, or 1,000 members of staff. That's not all lawyers. And I mean, I suppose in a nutshell, that's who I am, but I think I'm more than that. You know, I'm very much involved in all sorts of community initiatives. My main area of specialism is human rights, but within that context, immigration and asylum and refugee rights, migration policy, social policy, race discrimination, that sort of thing.
Okay. Well, thanks for giving us just the brief version of yourself there. Happy for that. Our main conversation this morning will primarily focus on immigration law.
Yes.
You know, it's a conversation that is brewing in the air these days.
Yes.
You know, the new administration soon to coming in the U.S. been speaking a whole lot of that from the campaign, and of course, when they do take effect from sometime in January, we're going to hear a lot more as relates to that.
Yes.
If we could start the conversation in this particular way, of course, you have some speciality, not some, but have a speciality in immigration law.
Yes.
Tell us a bit, if I may ask a question, if there's someone who is listening out there right now may want to understand, what is immigration law? If I could ask that question.
That's a hell of a question.
It's a bit of a broad question, I know, but
well, each country,
the simplest term, as I would like to say it in that way.
Well, each country have a body of laws or a set of sources of the rules and policies that govern who might cross its borders, who might land in its country. So Grenada has the same. We saw I think it was last year or year before, when a number of people from Haiti pitched up on your shores, and I felt that was a breach of the Refugee Convention, that they were summarily dismissed and sent back to Haiti without much investigation as to whether they had legitimate claims or had been trafficked, or had they been given interpreters to understand what their cases were. So international immigration law covers domestic laws, whatever the rules are in your country, the statutory provisions. There may be some common law aspects. That's one thing, but there are also a range of international sources that also covers immigration and migration law, refugee law, asylum-seeking law, etc. So the main one is the International Convention on Human Rights, the International Convention on Refugee, rather. We've got the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and a myriad of international treaties, some of which Grenada is a signatory to, some of which it isn't. And that's what governs it. In my case, working in the UK, I've got thousands and thousands of pages of rules and policies, and then there's all the statutory provision. We get a new piece of primary legislation almost every year, and we will, because we've also got a new government. We've also got EU jurisprudence, so even though we're outside of the EU as a sort of trading bloc because of Brexit, we're still very much in the European Court of Human Rights and the European Convention on Human Rights, and then we've got all the international provisions like the Refugee Convention and the Universal Declaration. So it's huge.
All right. I mean, happy to hear that. I mean, the technical issues of it, I'm learning as I go along with you, because you know I'm limited to the laws of the laws as relation to that.
Yes.
But I'm learning along with you. Now, if someone is asked a question, I'm an immigrant. I'm went to a particular country. Why is it important that an immigration lawyer, how important I should say, how important is an immigration lawyer?
Well, immigration law is extremely complex. I've touched on it in the last answer, which is that the jurisprudence is huge. It's domestic, it's international. There are international bodies, even like the UN High Commissioner for Refugees makes policy. The International Organization of Migration makes policy. So it's huge. It's fraught with complexity. So, for instance, one of the things I've been very involved in has been trying to get justice for those black and brown people who came to the UK in the 1940s, 50s, 60s and 70s, known as the Windrush generation, but the term is problematic. And they either had British status, citizenship status, or they were British subjects, and then they were denied it. And all sorts of things which you are probably fully aware of, and your listeners might be fully aware of, and viewers, that, you know, they were being denied those rights because they couldn't prove that they had the right piece of paper or the right stamp in their passport that proved it. And when you look at the law, I mean, there's like 20 pieces of primary legislation, then God knows how many cases. It is so fraught, and every case is unique. As it also depends on other things, like when did your own country become independent, what was in the constitution of your country. So it is not a straightforward piece of work. Lots of people can do things on their own. I mean, if you're applying for visas and stuff, of course you can do that on your own. But immigration law is not often that. It's often these complex questions about who's a citizen, who's entitled to naturalise as a citizen, whether somebody should be deported or not because they've committed a crime, or whether they should be administratively removed because they've overstayed their visa. We've got the whole myriad of what happened to EU citizens post-Brexit in the UK. Grenada will have something similar in terms of its own legislation, and very often you do need a lawyer to pick through. I mean, when I started out in practice, the immigration rules of the UK were about 30 pages. Now it's over 1,000 pages. That's just the rules, and the rules is just a document that sits there. It's not the statutes, etc. So, I mean, that's why, you know, immigration lawyers exist. Our work is hard. It's extremely intellectual, and of course we come a cropper against the right wing, against the state, because they don't like our existence, because without our existence people's rights would be denied to them.
All right. Now, our purpose of our conversation this morning, there been a recent a release out from government a couple of days ago.
Yes.
But before we get into the release a whole lot and understanding the implication that will be available on Grenada, how important is that? Of course, how will it affect, you know, the statements that were thrown out, especially during the campaign, the US campaign, in terms of deportation and so forth? How will this affect Grenadians and other Caribbean nationals? How will this affect us in some way or the other?
So, at the moment, we're seeing a move amongst, and, you know, right, left, what is that these days? But, you know, perhaps politicians who perhaps aspire to more libertarian ideology, more what we would have called right-wing ideology, more protect your borders ideology, talking down migrants. Now, the UK does it. And if we've got time, we could come to the UK because it's a particular
That's your neck of the woods, I would say.
Yes, my neck of the woods. It's what I know. Well, I can't know everything about it, but it's what I know a lot about. But we've seen in Hungary, we've seen in Italy, and even in the countries where they have perhaps more centrist ideology in their governments, everyone is knocking down migration. Now, there's partly because of the visuals of it, you know, people crossing over the Horn of Africa and coming across the Channel Tunnel in the UK by boats. So this whole phenomenon of people coming in the boats has really got people vexed. Whilst and when you arrive, you know, you do get housing, you do get support in terms of welfare benefits, etc. But all of this is happening at a time when those countries are becoming impoverished. Now, those countries are becoming, I mean, the UK has about 3 million children who are in extreme poverty, and this is supposed to be the 5th largest country or the 5th largest economy in the world. Now, this impoverishment is because of bad planning, bad policy. You know, we can find tens of millions of pounds to send to Ukraine, But we can't find money to feed our children. So it depends on what policy decisions you make. But what these right-wing politicians, and unfortunately some on the left and the centre do, as we're seeing with our current government, is to say, look, the problem isn't us. The problem are these black and brown people coming on our shores, whether that's Windrush, whether it's the new arrivals in the boats. And it's not true. So if I give you an example of this, we have about 30,000 people coming across the channel in these boats a year, right? 99% of them, and this is the government's statistic, not ours, claim asylum, when they land, which is what you're supposed to do. And then that makes your journey legal, and you're now legal. Of those, 3/4 get asylum. That's either in the first instance or through an appellate court, yes? So it means that they were genuinely fleeing persecution. Now, of course, there are going to be people who are going to try it on, and of course, we get muddled about this whole thing about economic migrants. But the vast majority go on. But if you look at the world data, there are 120 million people displaced. I mean, Trinidad and Tobago takes a couple 100,000 people from Venezuela. I mean, Colombia took 2 million. The Rohingyas, who are the most destitute people in the world at the moment, 1 million of them are in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is one of the poorest countries in the world, and Britain, as the 5th richest country in the world, and sometimes when you live there it's hard to believe that, but it's because they have the reserves and the gold blocks and everything put away, is saying it can't cope with 30,000 people. It's a lie. But what you have are the populist politicians, you have the right-wing journalists and so on, stoking up this fear and hatred of migrants. And so your question was about the US, and that's exactly what Trump's done. I mean, he won the elections partly on that, you know. Our government in the UK won the elections partly on migration. It's always, even though all the opinion polling and expert research shows that migration is not uppermost now. It's a thing. It's something that worries people, but it's not in the top 5 when we've got no schools, we've got fuel crisis, we've got food price crisis, we've got the NHS, which is a massive issue. You know, got 6 million people waiting for appointments to see a doctor or a specialist in the NHS, and they blame that on migrants. How are 6 million people affected by 30,000? So you do the maths. But Trump has signalled this populist anti-migrant fervour. He has already said that he's going to be deporting people left, right and centre. I mean, last time he said he was going to build a wall, mind you, and he didn't. Yeah. So we don't know how much of this is rhetoric and playing out to what we call the base. You know, the base, the people who like to hear this, you're going to be tough on migrants. Yesterday, I heard one of Trump's transition team say that they're going to even deport people who are legally in the country but whose parents aren't. So it's madness. Lawyers will be extremely busy. A lot of it won't happen. It's the same in the UK. We had this dreadful thing called the Rwanda Economic Development Partnership. We were going to offshore our asylum seekers to Rwanda, and that's very relevant to the point of the statement that was put out by the Grenada government, if we have time for that. And so they're going to say, now some horrible things will happen to migrants because they want the visual of carting people up, putting them in cages, putting them in vans, sending them back across the border, shackling them and putting them on planes. But it will be a tiny amount of people. You won't be able to move most people. They'll have claims to be able to stay, legitimate claims, and that's what we found in the UK. But it's their politicking, and I think for Grenadians, if any Grenadian who's undocumented in the US must be very worried, because some people will get caught up in this fervour, and some of them may well do.
All right, we're due for a break. Let's take it. When we come back, I want us to diverge into the statement that was released a wee bit and see how we can, of course, decipher what is real reality about.
Yes, of course.
When we do come back. Stay with us, folks. It's To The Point, Classic Radio, GBN TV. We take a break. We'll be right back. Don't touch it out.
When you need your
tourism is me, tourism is you, tourism is everybody, and tourism connects us all.
Did you know that tourism generates revenue and foreign exchange earnings?
Did you know it stimulates infrastructural development and facilitates cultural exchange among people?
You must know tourism is linked to all industries,
from agriculture to construction.
So support the industry today and be welcoming to all our visitors.
Tourism is my business. Tourism is your business. Tourism is our business. to one and all. Tourism connects us all.
A message from the Ministry of Tourism
And the Grenada Tourism Authority.
Coming up, it's the season for love as this movement makes a difference for yet another year. The food we're serving, cocktails flowing, and the rhythms ongoing. Welcome everyone to a truly joyous edition of Caribbean Passport. It's all next on this station.
Welcome back once again, listeners. Welcome back, viewers. It's To The Point, Classic Radio, GBN TV. Good morning to our listeners via our social media platforms, whether it's a Facebook page, YouTube channels. Good morning. And you also will get the option to chime in. Of course, if you would like a question or two to throw to Ms. Mackenzie, you can feel free to do so when we get to that particular segment of the conversation this morning. Now, Ms. Mackenzie, welcome back once again. I want to read this statement that was sent out by of course, the Office of the Prime Minister. And this is the officer advised that the government of Grenada has not engaged in any discussion regarding the deportation of migrants to Grenada. Furthermore, no proposal has been presented regarding this matter. Now, the clarification comes amidst the concerns raising surrounding the NBC News article claiming that the incoming Trump administration plans to deport some migrants to countries other than their own. End of the statement there. Your take on this? What's your take on this from being a lawyer? Your take on this particular the response from government, especially for the last part, where it says surrounding that NBC News article claiming that the incoming Trump administration will plan of deporting some migrants in countries other than their own. Could a country send individuals to a country other than their own?
Yeah.
Could that be done?
So just to preface this, that's exactly what is happening around the world. Governments are trying to find countries that will take nationals other than their own. So we saw Prime Minister Meloni in Italy trying to do a deal with Albania. That has just failed. Yeah. We saw the past UK government trying to send asylum seekers to Rwanda under the Rwanda Economic Development Partnership Plan. That failed through court action. And then bits of it that remained, the current government has abandoned it. So all governments, and Trump will have seen this, and he knows how difficult it is to remove people to their own countries. I mean, right now, you might not be able to remove anybody to Syria. For instance, some countries, absolutely, some countries like China, for example, say, well, how do we know these people are Chinese? Where's their travel document? So some countries just don't engage. So it's difficult to remove people, and it's nefarious because it shows that some of the people who get caught up in this. So I represented one of the Rwanda 6 who was actually stuck on the tarmac, shackled, handcuffed, ready to be flown out to Rwanda, and until we got a stay in the UK court. So it was part European Court of Human Rights, but it was also part domestic courts that stopped that. And he is somebody who was trafficked from Iraq. He's Iraqi Kurdish. Doctors, and that's government's own doctors, have said that there are signs of torture on his body. So, these are it's the sort of people you can't remove to their own countries that you're going to try and shove them somewhere else. So I'm almost certain, when I saw the statement from the Grenada government, I'm almost certain that somewhere Trump's transition team has been looking at countries that they might be able to do a deal with to take people. Now, they will look for all kinds of indicators. So firstly, in the UK government actually said that they were going to be doing this with Ghana, and they also said they were going to do this with Albania, and both those countries did exactly what Grenada did. They said, no, nobody's had any discussions with us. And what is usually the case is that these teams that work on these things are looking at countries. So they may have looked at Grenada and they say, Grenada's very keen to take in people. It's got an amazing citizen by investment program that's taken on, thousands of people. It probably needs a greater population to grow its economy. It may be open to deals, for instance. It will look at countries. And so somebody may well have just jotted this down on a bit of paper, the back of an envelope, and said, let's put Grenada on that list. Now, it's probably absolutely the case that Grenada didn't know about this. Somebody's thinking in the States about which countries. They haven't yet come to Grenada with a proposal. Now, if you look at the Rwanda plan with the UK, we have just spent almost £1 billion on a scheme that has failed. All right? The government's official figure is 715 million, but the current government, looking through the records, are saying that they think it's a higher figure than that, of which half of that went to the Rwandan government. In fact, that money's meant to be for infrastructure. So you get these governments who are quite keen to get more money coming in order to help their people. On the one hand, you can understand it. Yes. Rwanda was given money to build housing for people from the UK. And then very shortly after those housing were built, they were actually sold off to Rwandans. So the whole thing is just mad. But I suspect somewhere someone is thinking about Grenada. They've not yet come to the government, so the government statement is probably accurate. I think it is an accurate, some people are saying, oh, how do we know? But what the statement doesn't say, and also similarly the one from the Bahamas doesn't say, which is what we'd like to see,
yes,
is if they come to you with a plan, what are you going to do?
But that would lead to my next question. What are the implications, just in case the governments of the countries that was mentioned decide, well, we want to go with it? An offer was made that seems to be, good enough.
They may be open to it.
What are the implications for us as locals, if we refer to that?
Well, I think Grenada has to... I've always said that I kind of understand some of the European countries, like the southern European countries, that, there's a part of Spain that's actually geographically in Africa, Melilla. So people coming across Africa will end up there first, right? And then they start trekking through. The Refugee Convention does not say you must claim asylum in the first safe country you get to. It doesn't say that at all. However, if it did, and if that was the policy and the law, lots of people will end up in Spain. Well, everybody would have to claim in Spain.
Yes.
Why should Spain? Spain's quite a smallish country in comparison, and also it's not really the most developed of the European countries, despite its excursion into, trading and enslavement and so forth. It hasn't done very well for itself. So you've got this problem with some countries having a disproportionate, and I've always said, and I do quite a lot of speaking on this, and I've always said the whole issue about asylum seekers and refugees, and Trump won't just be talking about asylum seekers and refugees, he'll be talking about people who are undocumented, perhaps people who've committed a crime, coming out of prison. He'll be talking about a myriad of people. But on the question of asylum seekers and refugees, which is what most countries seem to be vexed about, and a lot of people who live in those countries, because they feel they get better rights, better treatment, etc., in these times of austerity and impoverishment. What he will be talking about is actually... sorry, we're talking about Trump now, aren't we? Sorry, I was just moved on to something else there. What he will be talking about is putting people into countries that he thinks will accept them, which I think I've said. But what the countries then have to say, and this is my view, is that some of these countries do have to be part of that international system. Yes. Obviously, now Grenada doesn't receive any asylum seekers or refugees. Well, why is that? Why is that? Now, experts, and I'm not an expert on Grenada's economy, I'm not an expert on Grenada's, I don't know what Grenada's birth rate's like. I don't know if Grenada's sitting on a time bomb where it's not going to have enough people going forward. I know things like SGU and all sorts of stuff bring more people in, and it's supposed to boost the economy. I don't know what the economists and the planners have said Grenada's ideal population per its density should be. So somebody ought to look at that, and it may well be, and which is why I was so annoyed when Grenada turned the Haitians around, because one, they're in need, but two, you've got to have some people in your country. Yes, you have every right to manage your borders, you need to know who these people are, due diligence has to be done, but Grenada can't say, well, we're a signatory to these international conventions and we're not taking anybody anyway. So if there is a way of Grenada being part of the international community and saying, well, we will settle 1,000 people. Let's say 1,000 Palestinians need to find a home, or who knows what's going to happen in Syria. The government, the people who manage borders, the planners, the economists, civil society ought to have a conversation. You can't just say, no, we don't want anybody here. Oh, we don't want to change our demographics. I mean, Grenada's demographics are shifting anyway. Yeah. But that conversation needs to take place. But that is different to if Donald Trump's government was to say, here's a deal, here's $1 billion US. We want you to take in 50,000 people that we don't want. I don't think Grenada should be doing that at all. I don't think they should be agreeing
under those particular circumstances.
Under those particular circumstances, Grenada should not do any deals like that.
You know, and I mean, it's not only Grenada, but we talk in the Caribbean as a whole.
Yes.
Should not be, of course. I wouldn't say not entertain the conversation. It could be, because there are countries who
should support.
Who could do it a little beefing up of the economy in terms of the personnel.
Well, I mean, look at Guyana. I mean, Guyana's empty. Yeah. You know, and I mean, you know, it's got less than 1 million people. I mean, they could probably do with another 1 million people. You know, they've got the highest GMPI or whatever it's now called, GNIP, PI, whatever it's changed, isn't it? It goes to national products now changed to GMPI, I think. But anyway, I mean, they are likely to become, I understand, one of the richest countries per capita.
Yeah.
And they need people to fuel that economy. So perhaps they ought to sit. But then if you take 1 million people and you've only got 800,000, then your demographics might shift, and you know, all sorts of things would happen in terms of who will vote and who they'll vote for. And I mean, which is one of the issues about the.
I mean, there's a lot of implications to fill in before this could actually
there's
happen.
All sorts of things. That's what I'm saying. There needs to be a conversation. But what we don't want to be, what Grenada does not want to be, is the vessel for a very, very dodgy, shady deal that's coming from Donald Trump. Grenada does not want to go there. If Grenada wants to alternatively say, we want to look at helping with the world refugee crisis, because there is, as I said, there's 120 million people who are currently displaced around the world, and most of those are in very, very poor countries. Most of those are in Africa and Asia. So if Grenada wanted to do something, it can do something, and it could just. I mean, I've been very involved in trying to airlift very sick children out of Gaza. You know, we had a baby that was about to die. We had so many problems. Eventually, we got the child into Egypt, and her life has been saved. And I actually did think about Grenada. I did think, you know, we've got SGU and we've got brilliant doctors. I mean, there's all sorts of issues about the hospital, but we've got some brilliant doctors. And, you know, well, why wouldn't Grenada say, well, we'll be part... I mean, you may take 10 people, you may take 20, but why is Grenada not part of this conversation about having people come here who are in need? If we can support them, we have to be able to support them.
All right. Now, my next question, Lisa, this in terms of from a government perspective. Now, here in this particular, of course, what has been mentioned was statement that were thrown out, and the release, yes, the release. Although it doesn't say much, but it still says a lot. How can government by themselves deal with this on an international front? How can government deal with this?
Well, if you've got some serious lawyers here... you've got serious lawyers here. I didn't mean it that way. Oh, gosh, I'm going to be thrown out of the Bar Association. What I mean is, if you've got lawyers here who challenge these sorts of things, as we do in the UK, so if you've got some public law, you know, lawyers who specialise in public law or admin law, who will challenge this, if there is a grubby deal on the table, and sensitise civil society and, old-fashioned word, but the masses, so to speak, then it's not likely to happen, because government's eye will be on the mood, you know, the mood of the people, yes. The ability of the lawyers to be able to challenge this and make sure it doesn't happen. So that's what will happen at a local level. And in every single country so far, you had in Australia, you know, they had the offshoring and detention of people in Nauru and Papua New Guinea, and lawyers there fought that because it was inhumane. Some of the women who were in those detention centres were raped. You know, there was no safeguarding. All sorts of problems. Their rights were denied, and lawyers fought it. We fought Rwanda. Lawyers fought Italy, and that's why Albania's not happening. And I'm certain, and I know some great lawyers here in Grenada. I know that admin law and public law is not a huge thing here, judicial reviews, but there are lawyers who practice that, and I'm sure if there is a mood swing against a grubby deal, there'll be people wanting to challenge that.
Okay. We drew for a break once again. Let's take it when we come back. We continue the discussion here. It's Classic Radio GBN TV. We'll be right back after the break. Don't touch.
I'm Kenroy Batiste from GBN News. Season's greetings, everyone. Wishing you the very best for the holiday season. Spend time with each other, be good to each other, and celebrate each other. Looking ahead to 2025, my wish is for love, joy, and peace to reign in your life. Go forth, do more, and be more. You are loved.
Grenada Duty Free and GBN, we are partnering for this Christmas season. Folks, it's going to be a bumper one. We can actually start feeling the energy, the vibe we start building, the promotions that start coming in, and the fragrances, the chocolate. We have up 15%, 20%, 40%. It's going to be a crazy one. We are looking forward to seeing you. We are ready to treat you guys special. We are ready to give back to you after this whole year of, being with us and everything and the support. So with our partnership with GBN, it's going to be a bumper season. Looking forward to seeing you guys.
Proud sponsors of Christmas with GBN includes Ace Hardware, Hubbards, Flow, Duty Free Caribbean, and I'm Supportings. This holiday season, get ready for a magical celebration packed with culinary delights, crafts, and music that will bring joy to your heart. But that's not all. Lots of giveaways are waiting for you. Stay tuned and make this Christmas one to remember only with GBN.
Hello, everybody. My name is Renee Goodwin, and I am the marketing manager here at True Blue Bay Resort. And I am so excited to invite you all to join us every Thursday on GBN, starting from November 7th, as we count down to the holiday season, right here at True Blue Bay Resort, Grenada's best family-friendly resort for visitors and locals.
Welcome back once again, listeners. Welcome back, viewers. We have, of course, Miss Kenzie with us this morning. Jacqui McKenzie. Let me get that right. With us this morning, and she's an immigration lawyer, and of course, among other things. And of course, we having a conversation this morning. We're talking immigration law. So, for you listeners and viewers out there, if you do have a question or two that you may like to ask, of course, feel free to do so in this segment. We just have a few more minutes left on today's program. Now, my next question leads to this before we get to the phone lines, and I'll be entertain the call as they come. Now, the process that we've been hearing about, for some reason, the government was not consulted. It could be just a weird question I'm asking. The government was not consulted. Plane loads of immigrants landed on our shores. What are we to do? How are we to handle this?
From where? Where are they coming from?
Wherever part of the... Let's say, for instance, we're talking more of the U.S.
Yeah.
And they decided they're going to ship, or have some folks flown to the island, in their magnitude. So how are we to handle this?
I think if there's not an agreement, that's not going to happen.
Whether there's not agreement or not. But
So
sometimes things that could just happen.
Yeah, so plane loads. So I've just recently been involved in a case in the UK where a boatload of people from Sri Lanka, Tamils from Sri Lanka, ended up in Diego Garcia. Diego Garcia is part of the Chagos Islands, which is a British territory. And after 2 years of fighting, they've now come to the UK. They've had to bring them to the UK. Britain was resisting that. So sometimes people just turn up on your territory. You've got to go through due process.
Yeah.
If they've come because... so if they're Grenadians, of course, then
we have to
you have to accept your people. If they're not Grenadians, then you don't have to give landing rights.
Yes.
I would have thought.
What about you not knowing who their nationalities are?
Well, no. I mean, I suppose if a plane is in your airspace seeking landing rights, you're going to have to. You don't then. So landing rights is a legal term, meaning you process them and allow them beyond your border. You don't have to do that. You can literally say, "Well, I'm sorry, we're not admitting you to Grenada," which is what they did with the Haitians, really.
Yeah.
So we're not admitting you to Grenada, and so they were refused.
But after knowing they are Haitians in the initial stages.
Yeah, but let's say the plane load is full of people from Gaza. right? You have to go through due process. If they say, well, look, a friend or, some friendly, I don't know, billionaire pilot has, brought them here and they want to seek asylum, if they say they're seeking asylum, you've got to process.
So true. Right.
It doesn't mean you've got to grant it, but you've certainly got to go through due process.
All right, we do have a caller. Let's see what this call. Caller, you're live. Good morning. Go right ahead, please.
Hey, GT, good morning.
Good morning to you.
To the young lady.
Yes, that's Ms. Mackenzie with us this morning.
Okay, could you hear me, GT?
Yes, we hear you. Go right ahead, please.
Okay, as New York City is a sanctuary state, right, that accept immigrants, right? And we heard about the news from NBC, I mean, all right? Okay, I want to know how would that affect a state as New York City, all right? And with that talk that we hearing from Trump, would that have to be an executive order from him or something like that will have to go to the Senate for a vote?
I think you got the...
So, but did you mean NDC though?
Well, he was talking about the news station that actually made the initial statement.
Yeah.
To that.
Yeah. Well, no, you're absolutely right. New York City is a sanctuary city. There's lots of sanctuary cities in the States, which simply means that you give succor and support to people seeking asylum. I suspect that Trump's going to move primary legislation through the Senate. We haven't seen, I don't know what the figures are in his favour, but he can also do this by way of executive order. By one way or the other, he will attempt to bring this in, either as law or as policy. I mean, already there is significant statutory provision to enable him to move people back to their own countries, but we're now talking about moving people to what we call a third country, so US and their home countries being first and second country, but so like taking, I don't know, Haitian and sending them back to Grenada, for instance. There is no policy or law that allows that to happen. And yes, there will have to be legislation. You can't just do it. Not only will there have to be legislation, there'll also have to be agreements with the host country. So Grenada would have to agree to it.
All right. How concerned should, of course, immigrants, especially those in the U.S. who are Grenadians and so forth, who are, of course, illegal in some way or the other, how concerned should they be as relation to this?
Well, I mean, you should always be concerned. I mean, I'm always amazed that people stay in a country without any documentation, because you're constantly watching over your back, aren't you? You know, I deal a lot with people who are arrested on jobs or at their homes and put into immigration detention centres, which are really ghastly places, and then sometimes removed or deported. So it's a horrible business, and I think that if there are Grenadians who are undocumented for whatever reason, they really ought to be trying to get their act together and get their papers sorted or come home. I mean, I don't know what some of them are doing there, actually living and watching over their show. Grenada's amazing. It's an amazing country, and it's going places. And I if I was given a choice between living in New York and working in some of the jobs that I see people in Grenadians in New York doing, and living in some of those tenement blocks that they call apartments and so forth, being undocumented and coming home and contributing to the development of Grenada, I'd be coming home. But yes, of course they should be anxious. A lot of what Trump's going to do is rhetoric. A lot of it won't happen, but he's certainly going to want some visuals of something happening, because he's speaking to a particular base, and that's the base that put him into office.
All right. Immigration concerns for the U.S. has always been a serious matter for some reason. I mean, the President Biden administration and now the incumbent Trump administration have been using that during his campaign to get, immigration to the point, I think, one of the main reasons he was voted in. Immigration as a whole around the world, for how you see it and how Trump plan on doing it, is it an instant issue that's going to take place in terms of we're going to see this, as he said, on day one, this is what I'm going to be doing? Should countries of the Caribbean, inclusive of Grenada, be on the alert for the vast deportation of we're going to be seeing coming, or deportation of individuals? So should we really be on an alert for that?
The vast deportation of their own nationals coming back. Yeah, there will be some. There will be some people coming back. There will be enforcement. He'll probably put more resources into enforcement. It's a bit rich, isn't it? All these white-led racist countries talking about immigration. I mean, they're all immigrants. I mean, you know, speak to the Navajo Indians of America, or the Maori in New Zealand, or, or the Aborigines in Australia. And these are the sorts of countries that don't want any more black and brown people. And these countries are built on immigration. Who has the right to be where? I mean, I am very friendly and quite supportive of people who have a no borders approach. I personally believe that countries do need to have protection for their borders, particularly in these times. But I think most of what you hear that's posited as we need to manage borders or we need to manage migration is really racism. We don't want any more black and brown people in our country. So, for instance, in the UK, it's even more pernicious than that, is we don't want any more black and brown Muslim people, because demographic shifts and all sorts of planning suggest that in some parts of the UK, their numbers will outnumber what they call indigenous white populations. But indigenous white populations are not even the indigenous people of the United Kingdom, as we now know through historians. So it's all problematic.
All right.
It's all problematic. What we need at the forefront of all of this is humanity, really.
Okay. We do have another caller. Caller, you're live. Good morning.
Good morning, bro. Good morning to you guys.
Good morning.
My biggest concern is that with Trump deportation vibes he's bringing on it right now is the people that, remember he said that he's going to deport the criminals first. And having all these people that in jail and doing all of the crime in America coming back to this country called Grenada, I think, are we ready for that? All these criminals coming back home. So I think we should look at that first and foremost. How are we going to deal with all the criminals coming back to Grenada?
Thank you, caller.
Yeah, no, so as I said at the start, I'm half Jamaican, and Jamaica's had a huge problem with people with criminal convictions, terrible criminal convictions, coming back, being deported to Jamaica, and the accusation being from academics and social policy analysts and governments and security forces that a lot of crime has been attributed to some of them.
Yeah.
And I've been to Jamaica with the British Home Office, actually, because we were looking at particularly women who were drug mules in the UK and what was happening to them. I was particularly concerned about what was happening to them when they were returned to Jamaica and still owed drug debts and were put in very precarious housing and all sorts of problems. So we had a field trip there, and we worked very closely during that field trip with the American group. So the Americans have organised, as they call them, the American deportees, and that's become part of folk culture, actually, songs about them and all sorts of things, plays and so on. Some of them have formed themselves into civil society organisations because there's all sorts of problems. They can't get jobs. They can't get the number, I think it's called the IRN or the URN number that they have to get in order to get work and so forth. Jamaica doesn't have a Rehabilitation of the Offenders Act. So if you've got a criminal conviction, it doesn't become spent at any time. Grenada's the same. It doesn't become spent. So you've always got that hanging over you. So it makes you unemployable in public sector jobs and that sort of thing. So they formed themselves into civil society, and they told us some stories, about some of the I don't like the terms gangsters, and it's all pejorative, but there are some people who do get deported from the US who were part of gangs or who are very violent offenders and do cause problems when they get to their country. And that is certainly the case across Latin America, Venezuela, which is a place I know a little bit about. That's happened there too. It's even happened in Grenada. I know of a couple cases in Grenada where some crime has been attributed to people who have been deported. The difficulty that all these countries have is that these are your people, these are your nationals, so you're going to have to take them on board. If Grenada sees an escalation in the numbers coming in, and most people, when they've served their time and they get deported, they just settle back into society and become citizens of that country, causing no bother at all.
Some do.
There will be some who will be part of a lifestyle, and Grenada will have to address that if it becomes an issue. At the moment it isn't, but presumably Grenada's always looking ahead. It's always planning. its police, its army, its security services, its governments, its ministries will always be planning, and because they've heard the language of Trump, no doubt somebody somewhere in a ministry is giving some thought to this and planning for it. And I think the caller has asked a really good question.
That's all we hope. We do have another caller, which will be our final caller for the morning. Caller, you're live. Good morning.
Yes, good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Titi, and good morning to your guests. Now, that situation, to me, it is a language to our leaders. It tells them that they have to be more independent and focus on developing, building the economy, building the people, putting the people in a situation, an economic situation, that even those things happen, it don't affect us. We lag behind in terms of the development of working on those. That is the reason why this thing, in other words, we have this fear. We shouldn't have a fear if we actually were proactive in the development of our country, the building of the economy, and the positioning of our people to survive. Yeah, that is our problem. And this, as I say, is a language, and it's a lesson for us. We have to learn from these things. I'm not fearful about that. If we could grow the economy and position the economy to take care of our people, I don't see we having a problem at all. Have a good day, sir.
Thank you, caller. Thank you so much. I do have a question from someone. Someone is asking a question. They're saying that does the United Nations on refugee has a monetary system in place to help countries like Grenada take in a handful of refugees?
Yes, there are. There are resettlement schemes. Yeah. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees and the International Organization of Migration are both very involved in settlement schemes across the globe. I don't know whether they've ever approached Grenada about taking people. I've never heard anybody in Grenada say anything about this. I don't know if they admonished Grenada for turning the Haitians out without due process. But I think that last question is really an important one, because yes, of course, countries ought to develop. But one of the things that some countries are actually using these deals in order to develop. So Rwanda saw the opportunity for hundreds of millions of pounds coming into its coffers in exchange for taking what was going to be a relatively small number of asylum seekers from the UK as a way of developing. And I'm hoping that Grenada won't choose that route as a way of developing itself. Grenada probably does need population growth, and that's something that the planners must sit down and look at. It needs development programs, but I don't think that just taking part in a grubby deal, as I said earlier on, is the way to do it. But there are schemes. There are the UNHCR resettlement schemes. Grenada itself can offer countries where, it might say, look, children in Gaza are not going to school at the moment. Grenada might say, well, we can have 50 children go to school here. It could say that. It may say that we can't do it. We don't have the infrastructure for it, which is fair enough, so long as it's properly reasoned and thought out. But I think Grenada needs to be part of that conversation.
All right. Any closing comments, Kenzie, before we take a wrap?
Well, thanks for having me here. It's always good to speak about issues like immigration and asylum and how it affects Grenada, because Grenada, with its population size and its territory size, is very often outside of these conversations. But I think it's really important that it remains within the family of nations that tries to do its bit to resettle people or help people. The issue about Grenadians being deported is an issue, and that's a separate issue. But I really do hope somebody in government will make some decision about Grenada and perhaps offering Grenada, this amazing, beautiful country that is thriving, to help other people who are doing less well.
All right. Ms. Kenzie, I want to thank you once again for being on the program this morning. A pleasure having you. And thank you for so much for sharing the information that you did this morning. Certainly hope there was a listener or a viewer there that needed to hear some of the things you said, and certainly will make a difference for them in the decision makings, of course, even with those in authority.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Hey, folks, that's where we take a wrap for this edition of To The Point. Join me again tomorrow for another edition of To The Point. That's where we say goodbye for today.